The sterile silence of Memorial Hospital's ICU shattered as 50 pounds of German Shepherd launched through the doorway. A blur of tan and black fur collided with Dr. Reynolds, sending the syringe flying from his hand. "Get this animal out of here," the doctor screamed, stumbling backward as Wolf's teeth clamped onto his white coat sleeve, pulling with desperate determination. 3 orderlies rushed forward, but froze at the dog's guttural growl, a sound not of aggression but of something primal and desperate. Nurse Patricia Wilson pressed herself against the wall, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Oh, my God," she whispered, watching the scene unfold like a nightmare. Security guards appeared at the doorway, hands hovering over their belts, uncertain how to handle this unprecedented breach of hospital protocol. The dog wasn't attacking randomly. It was deliberately positioning itself between the medical team and Frank Miller's motionless body. Then came the sound no one expected, a soft beep from the heart monitor, then another, and another, growing stronger, more insistent. Dr. Reynolds' jaw dropped as he stared at the readings. Frank's neural activity flatlined for 2 years, suddenly sparked with life. The dog's eyes, amber and knowing, locked onto the doctor's face as if to say, "I told you he wasn't gone." In that moment, science and reason gave way to something beyond explanation, a truth that would stagger not just this hospital room, but the very foundation of what we believe about life, death, and the bonds we forge along the way. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Frank Miller hadn't always been the quiet man with weathered hands who tended tomatoes in his backyard garden. For 27 years, he'd served as the lead K-9 handler for the Riverside Police Department, his broad shoulders carrying both a badge and the weight of countless dangerous operations. At 56, retirement had come not by choice but necessity, after a drug bust gone wrong left him with a permanent limp and nightmares that visited like unwelcome guests. His colleagues remembered him as Stone Cold Miller, the officer whose steady gaze never wavered even when facing down armed suspects. But those who truly knew Frank understood that beneath the tough exterior beat a heart loyal to a fault, especially toward his 4-legged partners. Wolf came into Frank's life as a last-minute replacement, a German Shepherd with unusual amber eyes and a temperament initially deemed too sensitive for police work. The department's trainer had been ready to release him from the program when Frank intervened. "Give him to me for 8 weeks," Frank had insisted. What followed became department legend. Wolf transformed into the most intuitive K-9 they'd ever seen, with an uncanny ability to detect danger before it materialized. Their bond transcended the typical handler-dog relationship. They moved as one, communicated without commands. When retirement loomed, Frank's only non-negotiable term was bringing Wolf home. "He's not department property," Frank had told the chief. "He's family." That family extended to Sarah Miller, Frank's wife of 32 years, a kindergarten teacher whose patience had weathered both her husband's dangerous career and his difficult transition to civilian life. Their son Michael, now a corporate attorney in Chicago, carried Frank's stubborn determination, but none of his father's affinity for risk. Lisa, their daughter, had followed closer to Frank's path as a wildlife conservation officer, inheriting his connection with animals and his unyielding sense of right and wrong. While Michael maintained a careful distance from his father's world, Lisa understood the unspoken language between Frank and Wolf, often remarking that they shared not just companionship but something deeper, a connection that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of human understanding, yet was undeniably real and profound. Retirement sat on Frank Miller like an ill-fitted suit. After decades of adrenaline-fueled police work, the quiet rhythms of suburban life felt foreign to him. 6 months in, he still woke at 4:30 a.m., body tensed as if preparing for a morning briefing that would never come. It was Wolf who gave structure to his days. Each morning at dawn, they walked the perimeter of their 2-acre property, Frank with his thermos of black coffee, Wolf alert at his side. Neighbors grew accustomed to the sight, the tall, silver-haired man with the military posture and the regal German shepherd who matched his stride. They made an impressive pair, even in this peaceful setting far removed from their former life of pursuit and protection. "You miss it too, don't you, boy?" Frank would sometimes murmur as they walked. Wolf's ears would prick up at the sound, amber eyes meeting Frank's with a depth of understanding that often left visitors unsettled. Sarah had initially worried about bringing a police-trained dog into their home, fearing Wolf might be too aggressive for domestic life. Those fears dissipated quickly. With Sarah, Wolf was gentle, often resting his head on her lap while she graded papers in the evening. He seemed to understand her routine, appearing at the door minutes before she arrived home from school each day. Frank found unexpected joy in simple tasks, building a chicken coop, expanding Sarah's garden, teaching Wolf new commands unrelated to tracking or apprehending suspects. He built a workshop in the back of the property where he crafted hand-carved wooden toys for his future grandchildren, should Michael or Lisa ever decide to have kids. Each night Frank would sit on the porch, Wolf at his feet, and tell stories of their old cases to the dog as if reminiscing with an old partner. Sarah would watch from the kitchen window, relieved to see her husband finding peace after years of danger. "Frank's got a better therapist than any the department could have assigned him," she once told Lisa on the phone. "That dog understands him in ways I never could." The autumn of their third year in retirement brought unusual weather. Late October saw a series of storms that local meteorologists struggled to explain. Not hurricanes or typical seasonal storms, but intense systems that stalled over their county, dumping unprecedented rainfall. The third such storm hit on a Thursday night. Rainfall so dense it obscured the security lights Frank had installed around the property. The wind howled with unusual ferocity, bending the old oak trees and sending debris skittering across the yard. Well past midnight, Wolf's behavior shifted dramatically. The normally composed dog began pacing the hallway, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen and back, his nails clicking urgently against the hardwood. Frank, awoken by the sound, found Wolf standing at the back door, body rigid, emitting a low whine unlike anything he'd heard from him before. "What is it, boy?" Frank asked, peering through the rain-lashed window. Nothing seemed amiss in the yard, just the expected storm chaos. Wolf pressed against Frank's leg, then backed away, repeating the motion as if trying to lead him from the door. Sarah appeared in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Wolf's acting strange," Frank replied, reaching to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Probably just the storm." But Wolf was insistent, growing more agitated as the night progressed. He stationed himself at the bedroom window, eyes fixed on the roofline, occasionally emitting soft, distressed whimpers. Frank and Sarah eventually returned to bed, but Wolf remained vigilant, his silhouette framed against the window until dawn broke through the diminishing storm. Morning revealed significant damage. 2 massive branches had crashed through the roof of Frank's workshop, and several sections of roof shingles had been torn loose from the main house. After breakfast, Frank surveyed the damage, making notes of repairs needed. The workshop could wait, but the house roof needed immediate attention before the next rain. "I'll get up there this afternoon," Frank told Sarah as he gathered his tools. "Should be a quick fix." Wolf appeared unusually anxious as Frank positioned the aluminum extension ladder against the side of the house. The dog circled the ladder's base, whining softly and occasionally tugging at Frank's pant leg. "Knock it off, Wolf," Frank said, gently pushing the dog away. "I need to fix this before more rain comes." Sarah watched from the kitchen door, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. "Maybe you should call someone, Frank. That roof's steep and it's still windy. And pay triple because of storm demand? I've climbed worse in the service. It's just a few loose shingles." As Frank began to ascend, Wolf's behavior escalated from concern to desperate. The shepherd barked sharply, something he rarely did, and physically placed himself between Frank and the ladder. When Frank persisted, Wolf grabbed his pant leg more firmly, pulling with determined strength. "Wolf, stay!" Frank commanded, using the authoritative tone that had always guaranteed obedience during their working days. For the first time in their long partnership, Wolf ignored the direct order. "Something's really bothering him," Sarah called, setting down her tea and walking toward them. "I've never seen him like this." "He'll be fine," Frank insisted, taking another step up. "He's probably still spooked from the storm." The next moments unfolded with terrible clarity. As Frank reached the midpoint of the ladder, a sudden gust caught the aluminum frame. The ladder's base, positioned on ground still soft from the night's rain, shifted slightly. Frank reached to steady himself against the gutter, but the metal trough, weakened by the storm, gave way under his weight. Sarah's scream pierced the air as Frank tumbled backward, falling 12 feet to the unforgiving ground below. The sickening thud of impact was followed by complete stillness. Frank lay motionless on the rain-soaked lawn, blood pooling beneath his head where it had struck a decorative landscape stone. Wolf was instantly at his side, nudging Frank's hand, licking his face, then raising his head to release a howl of such raw anguish that neighbors 3 houses away would later describe it as something between a wolf's cry and a human's grief. Sarah dropped to her knees beside her husband, fingers trembling as she sought a pulse. "Frank! Frank, can you hear me?" Her voice broke as she fumbled for her phone, desperately dialing 91100. Wolf remained pressed against Frank's side, his body shaking, eyes never leaving his master's face. The paramedics arrived within minutes that felt like hours. They worked efficiently, stabilizing Frank's neck, checking vital signs, speaking in the clipped professional language of emergency responders. Male, mid-50s, severe head trauma, possible spinal injury, unresponsive to stimuli, BP dropping. They had to physically move Wolf to access Frank, and the dog permitted this only after Sarah's tearful command. As they loaded Frank into the ambulance, the lead paramedic turned to Sarah with the careful neutrality of someone delivering potentially devastating news. "Ma'am, you should follow us to Memorial. Your husband's injuries are significant." Sarah nodded numbly, gathering her purse and keys. Wolf stood at the edge of the driveway, watching the ambulance doors close on his master, his posture unnaturally still except for the subtle tremors running through his powerful frame. When Sarah opened her car door, Wolf leapt in without invitation, something he'd never done before. "Okay," Sarah whispered, too overwhelmed to object. "He'd want you there, too." The neurosurgeon's face betrayed nothing as he delivered the prognosis to Sarah in the small consultation room of Memorial Hospital's intensive care unit. Dr. Alan Reynolds had spent 25 years delivering difficult news to families, and his approach was gentle but unvarnished. "Mrs. Miller, your husband has suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. The impact caused significant bleeding and swelling in his brain." He pointed to the various shadowed areas on the scan displayed on his tablet. "We've performed emergency surgery to relieve the pressure, but I need to be transparent about his condition." Sarah clutched her daughter Lisa's hand. They'd been waiting for 6 hours while Frank underwent surgery. Michael was still en route from Chicago. "Will he wake up?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Reynolds folded his hands. "The honest answer is, we don't know. The damage is extensive. Mr. Miller is currently in a deep coma with minimal brain activity. While we occasionally see patients recover from similar injuries, I would be remiss if I didn't prepare you for the possibility that he may remain in this state indefinitely." Lisa's jaw tightened. "What does indefinitely mean exactly?" "Weeks, months, potentially years. Some patients never regain consciousness." Dr. Reynolds shifted slightly in his chair. "I understand your husband was a police officer?" Sarah nodded. "Then I suspect he'd want you to have the full truth. The Frank you knew, his personality, his memories, those aspects of a person require complex brain function. Even if he were to wake up, there's a high probability of permanent cognitive impairment." The words landed like physical blows. Sarah pressed her fingertips to her lips, stifling a sob. Lisa's arm went around her mother's shoulders. "We'll continue monitoring him closely," Dr. Reynolds continued. "The next 72 hours are critical. After that, we'll reassess and discuss longer-term care options. Back in the ICU, Frank lay surrounded by machines, tubes running from his mouth, arms, and chest. His head was partially shaved and bandaged. The strong, vital man who had faced down armed criminals looked diminished, vulnerable. Sarah took the chair beside his bed, gently taking his hand in hers, careful not to disturb the IV line. "I'm here, Frank," she whispered. "We're all here." That first night established a pattern that would continue with unwavering consistency. Wolf sat outside the ICU doors, refusing food or comfort from anyone, his eyes fixed on the room where his master lay. Hospital policy prohibited animals, but after Wolf's distressed howling disrupted the entire floor, the head nurse made an unprecedented exception, allowing Wolf limited, supervised visits to Frank's bedside. Something in the shepherd's dignified grief moved even the strictest hospital administrators. "I've never seen anything like it," Nurse Wilson remarked to a colleague. "That dog sits there for hours without moving, like he's standing guard." Days stretched into weeks. Frank was moved from intensive care to a long-term care unit, his condition stable but unchanged. The ventilator breathed for him, feeding tubes provided nutrition. His brain activity remained minimal, with occasional spikes that Dr. Reynolds cautioned against interpreting too optimistically. Wolf's vigil never wavered. Sarah brought him to the hospital each morning, and he took his position either at Frank's bedside or outside the door when hospital activities required privacy. Staff began leaving a water bowl for him. Some even smuggled in treats or took him for brief walks in the hospital garden. When Sarah needed to return home for rest or to manage household affairs, Lisa would take her place, reading to her father while Wolf rested his head on the edge of the mattress, eyes never leaving Frank's face. "He's waiting," Lisa told her mother one evening. "Wolf doesn't believe Dad is gone." By the 6th month, difficult realities imposed themselves. Insurance coverage for intensive hospital care was running out. Frank would need to be transferred to a long-term care facility or brought home with specialized medical equipment and nursing visits. The financial implications were daunting. "We could sell the house," Sarah suggested during a tense family meeting around their kitchen table. "Move to an apartment closer to the care facility." Michael, who had returned to Chicago after the first month but flew back for weekend visits, shook his head. "Mom, that's not sustainable. The medical bills alone will deplete your retirement savings within a year or two." "So what are you suggesting?" Lisa demanded, her voice sharp. "That we just give up on Dad?" "I'm being realistic," Michael countered. "Dad wouldn't want us to bankrupt the family on what might be futile care." "Don't you dare!" Lisa's voice broke. "He's still in there. Wolf knows it." Michael ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Lisa, I love Dad too, but we can't base medical decisions on a dog's behavior, for God's sake." Their argument was interrupted by a soft whine. Wolf stood in the doorway, his expression somehow both alert and sorrowful. The dog crossed to Sarah's side, pressing against her leg in what seemed like solidarity. "We're not making any irreversible decisions yet," Sarah said firmly. "We'll find a way to manage the finances. Your father would move heaven and earth for any of us. We owe him the same." The financial strain grew as month 12 approached. Sarah had taken early retirement from teaching to care for Frank, significantly reducing their income. They converted the home office into a medical room equipped with a hospital bed, ventilator, and monitoring equipment. A nurse visited 3 times weekly, teaching Sarah how to suction Frank's breathing tube, check for pressure sores, and perform the physical therapy that prevented his muscles from completely atrophying. Wolf adapted to this new normal with remarkable intuition. He seemed to understand when to move aside for medical procedures and when his presence beside Frank was welcome. At night he slept beneath Frank's bed, his routine as disciplined as when they'd worked together on the police force. If the ventilator's rhythm changed even slightly, Wolf would alert before the machine's alarm sounded, waking Sarah with an urgent nudge. As the first anniversary of the accident approached, an unexpected threat emerged from outside the family. Thomas Wilson, a real estate developer who had been buying properties throughout their neighborhood, made Sarah an offer on their house, well below market value, but presented as a compassionate solution to her financial difficulties. "Mrs. Miller," Wilson said, standing on her porch one autumn afternoon. "I understand your situation. My offer would allow you to clear your medical debts and find suitable accommodations closer to a care facility. Your husband's condition, well, the statistics on recovery after this much time are not encouraging." Sarah noticed how Wolf, usually accepting of visitors, positioned himself between her and Wilson, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Wilson," Sarah replied coldly, "but our home is not for sale." Wilson's expression hardened momentarily before he recovered his professional smile. "Of course. Just know the offer stands. These medical expenses won't get lighter, and sometimes the most loving choice is acceptance." After he left, Sarah found Wolf still standing at the door, hackles raised, watching Wilson's car disappear down the street. She knelt beside the shepherd, burying her face in his fur. "You see through him, too, don't you?" she whispered. "We're not giving up. Not on Frank, not on our home. We promised, for better or worse, and we meant it." The second year of Frank's coma established routines that became sacred to both Wolf and the Miller family. Each morning at precisely 6 o'clock, Wolf would rise from his position under Frank's bed, stretch deliberately, and make a careful circuit of the room, checking windows, doorways, and finally Frank himself. He would place his muzzle gently near Frank's hand, seemingly testing for any response, before settling at Sarah's feet as she prepared the morning medications and feeding tube solution. "Good morning, Frank," Sarah would say, her voice deliberately bright despite the weight that had settled permanently in her chest. "It's Tuesday, October 12. Lisa's coming by this afternoon, and the maple outside is finally turning red. Your favorite." Wolf would watch these one-sided conversations with rapt attention, his amber eyes moving between Sarah's face and Frank's unchanging expression. When Sarah's voice occasionally broke mid-sentence, Wolf would press against her leg, a warm, solid presence, anchoring her to the moment, preventing her from drifting into despair. By mid-morning, the home health nurse would arrive. Kate Johnson, a gray-haired woman with 30 years of experience, had initially been scheduled for 3 visits weekly, but budget constraints had reduced this to once a week. Kate had developed a remarkable rapport with Wolf, who seemed to recognize her as an ally in Frank's care. "That dog understands more than most of my human patients," Kate often remarked, as Wolf anticipated her needs, moving aside just before she needed access to the ventilator, or fetching the blood pressure cuff from the bedside table when she reached for it. Under Kate's guidance, Sarah had become proficient in all aspects of Frank's care, turning him to prevent bed sores, performing passive range-of-motion exercises on his limbs, monitoring his vital signs, and managing the countless small crises that arose. The medical equipment that had initially seemed so alien and intimidating now blended into the background of their home, its beeps and hums a constant soundtrack to their lives. Wolf's own health had begun showing subtle signs of decline. The glossy sheen of his coat dulled slightly. Gray appeared around his muzzle and eyes. Most concerning to Sarah was his decreased appetite. Where he once enthusiastically devoured his meals, he now often left half uneaten, as though reserving his strength for the vigil that consumed his days and nights. "You need to take care of yourself too," Sarah would tell him, adding bits of chicken or beef to his kibble to tempt him. Wolf would dutifully eat a few mouthfuls to please her, then return to his post beside Frank. Lisa, who visited every weekend, noticed the change in Wolf immediately. "He's losing weight, Mom," she observed one Saturday, running her hands along Wolf's ribs, more prominent than they had been months earlier. "Has the vet seen him?" "He refuses to leave Frank for long enough," Sarah admitted. "Dr. Morales came to the house last month, but Wolf was so stressed being separated from your father that his blood pressure was too elevated for an accurate exam." "He's killing himself," Lisa whispered, tears welling. "He's literally working himself to death for Dad." Sarah had no answer. Wolf's devotion, beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure, mirrored her own. They were both tethered to Frank by bonds too profound to sever, even as hope dwindled and exhaustion mounted. Thomas Wilson's interest in the Miller property intensified as the second year progressed. What had begun as occasional friendly check-ins evolved into increasingly aggressive tactics. The property taxes on the Miller home mysteriously reassessed higher. Anonymous complaints about their yard maintenance were filed with the Homeowners Association, and rumors circulated in the neighborhood about plans to rezone the entire block for commercial development. Rumors that invariably traced back to Wilson's office. "He's trying to force us out," Lisa fumed after discovering their mail had been tampered with, specifically an overdue notice from the utility company that should have arrived weeks earlier. "This is harassment." Michael, during one of his increasingly rare visits, counseled caution. "We don't have proof Wilson is behind all this, and we can't afford a legal battle on top of everything else." His perpetual pragmatism, once a balancing force in family discussions, now seemed to Lisa and Sarah like a betrayal of Frank's fighting spirit. The confrontation between the siblings reached a breaking point during Michael's Christmas visit. Standing in the kitchen, voices lowered so Sarah couldn't overhear from Frank's room, Michael delivered what he considered a necessary truth. "We're approaching the 2-year mark, Lisa. You know what the doctors said. The chances of recovery after 24 months of coma are virtually non-existent." "So what are you suggesting?" Lisa hissed. "That we just pull the plug? That we give up because some statistics say we should?" Michael sighed heavily. "I'm suggesting we start discussing quality of life. Dads and moms. She's exhausted. Our savings are nearly gone. And Dad, Lisa, look at him. Really look. Would he want this existence? You don't know what he'd want because you're never here. You fly in for 24 hours, make your observations, and disappear back to your perfect life in Chicago." Lisa's voice rose despite her efforts to contain it. "Meanwhile, Mom and I and Wolf, yes, the dog you find so easy to dismiss, we're here every day fighting for him." Their argument was interrupted by a series of sharp, urgent barks from Frank's room, Wolf's alarm signal. Both siblings rushed in to find Sarah struggling with the ventilator, which had begun issuing a warning tone. "The power flickered," Sarah explained, hands steady despite her obvious stress. "The backup battery kicked in, but the settings reset. Hand me the manual." Lisa moved instantly to help while Michael stood frozen in the doorway, confronted with the daily reality his mother and sister navigated. Wolf paced anxiously between Frank and the machinery, his attention divided between his master and the device keeping him alive. Only when the ventilator resumed its normal rhythm did Wolf relax slightly, returning to his position beside the bed. Michael left the next morning, his departure marked by a strained silence. When his car pulled away, Wolf watched from the window with what Sarah could only describe as judgment in his amber eyes. As winter melded into spring, Dr. Reynolds scheduled a comprehensive evaluation of Frank's condition. 20 months had passed since the accident, a significant milestone in cases of prolonged unconsciousness. Sarah prepared for the appointment with meticulous care, bathing Frank, dressing him in a button-down shirt rather than a hospital gown, even trimming his beard and hair, which had grown long during his confinement. "He wouldn't want to look unkempt for the doctor," she explained to Lisa, who had taken the day off work to accompany them. Wolf, sensing the day's importance, maintained an even closer watch than usual, his body tense with alertness. The medical transport team arrived at 9, carefully transferring Frank from his home hospital bed to a gurney. Wolf followed every movement, positioning himself to maintain visual contact with Frank throughout the process. When the lead paramedic gently suggested that Wolf might need to stay behind, the shepherd planted himself firmly beside the gurney, his posture making clear that separation was not an option. "He's always come to appointments," Sarah explained. He's part of Frank's care team." The paramedic, noting Wolf's impeccable behavior and clearly special status, relented. "As long as he stays controlled in the hospital, we can transport him too." Memorial Hospital had grown accustomed to Wolf's presence over the months. The staff in the neurology department greeted him by name, some even keeping treats in their desk drawers. Dr. Reynolds, initially skeptical about allowing an animal into examination rooms, had witnessed enough of Wolf's extraordinary behavior to make a standing exception to hospital policy. The examination was thorough and methodical. Dr. Reynolds performed a series of tests, checking Frank's pupillary responses, testing reflexes, monitoring brain activity while introducing various stimuli. Wolf observed each procedure with intense focus, occasionally shifting position to maintain visual contact with Frank's face. When the test concluded, Dr. Reynolds invited Sarah and Lisa into his office. Wolf followed without invitation, settling beside Sarah's chair as if he too were family, which, Sarah reflected, he absolutely was. "Mrs. Miller, Lisa," Dr. Reynolds began, his expression carefully neutral. "I've reviewed all of Frank's test results, comparing them to his previous assessments." He paused, selecting his words with care. "While there are some small changes in brain activity patterns, they don't represent the kind of significant improvement we would hope to see after this amount of time." Sarah's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair. "What exactly does that mean for Frank's prospects?" Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, his voice gentle but definitive. "At this stage, nearly 2 years post-injury, we need to discuss realistic expectations. Frank remains in a persistent vegetative state. The minimal brain activity we're detecting is primarily automatic functions. There's no reliable evidence of consciousness, awareness, or cognitive processing." Lisa's voice was tight as she asked, "But there have been cases of people waking up after years, right?" "I've read about them. Those cases are exceptionally rare and typically involve different patterns of brain injury than your father's." Dr. Reynolds removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "More importantly, in the documented cases of late recovery, the patients had shown progressive signs of improvement leading up to consciousness, increasing brain activity, response to stimuli, sleep-wake cycles. Frank isn't demonstrating those patterns." Wolf, who had been lying quietly, suddenly raised his head, eyes fixed on Dr. Reynolds with an intensity that made the doctor pause momentarily. "The ethical question we must consider," Dr. Reynolds continued, addressing himself primarily to Sarah, "is about quality of life, both Frank's and your own. The resources, emotional, physical, financial, required to maintain this level of care are enormous, and the likelihood of meaningful recovery diminishes with each passing month." Sarah's back straightened. "Are you suggesting we withdraw care?" "I'm suggesting we have an honest conversation about palliative options. Continuing aggressive life support when recovery is highly improbable may not align with what Frank would have wanted for himself, or for you." Wolf stood abruptly, a low rumble emanating from his chest, not quite a growl, but a clear expression of disagreement. Sarah placed a calming hand on his head. "I appreciate your medical assessment, Dr. Reynolds," she said carefully. "But I know my husband. Frank is a fighter. He wouldn't give up on any of us, and we won't give up on him." The ride home passed in tense silence. Lisa drove while Sarah stared out the window. Wolf pressed against her in the back seat. The shepherd's warmth was the only thing keeping her from shattering into pieces. "Mom," Lisa finally said as they turned onto their street, "if you want to keep fighting, I'm with you, 100%. But we need to be practical about how we manage going forward. The financial situation—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, her voice strained. "I've been thinking about getting back to teaching, maybe part-time substitute work I could schedule around Frank's care. And what about Wilson? He's not backing down on trying to get the property." Sarah's expression hardened. "That man is the least of my concerns. This is our home, Frank's home. He's going to wake up in the house he loves with his family around him." Her voice broke slightly on the last words. As they pulled into the driveway, Wolf suddenly became alert, his attention fixed on the side of the house. Following his gaze, Lisa noticed a figure moving quickly away from their property line toward a car parked down the street. "Was that Wilson?" she asked, squinting at the retreating form. Sarah didn't answer. her focus shifting to the more immediate task of getting Frank settled back home. The medical transport team carefully moved him from the ambulance to his bed, reconnecting monitors and checking the ventilator settings. Throughout the process, Wolf maintained his vigilant watch, his body tense until Frank was securely situated and the equipment confirmed to be functioning properly. When they were finally alone, Sarah sat beside Frank's bed, taking his hand in hers. "We're home, love," she whispered, "and we're not going anywhere." That night, after Lisa had gone to bed in her old room, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She moved quietly to Frank's bedside, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest controlled by the ventilator. Wolf lay in his customary position beneath the bed, but his eyes were open, reflecting the dim light from the monitoring equipment. "You still believe he's in there, don't you?" Sarah whispered to the shepherd. "You still feel him." Wolf raised his head slightly, meeting her gaze with those intelligent amber eyes. In that moment, it was easy for Sarah to believe he understood every word, and more, that he shared her unwavering faith that Frank would someday return to them. "We won't let them give up on him," she promised, as much to herself as to Wolf. "No matter what Dr. Reynolds says, no matter what Michael thinks is practical, Frank would move mountains for us. We owe him nothing less." Wolf's tail thumped once against the floor, a sound of agreement Sarah chose to believe. She reached down to stroke his head, feeling the bond between them strengthened by their shared devotion to the man who had brought them together. What neither Sarah, Lisa, nor Wolf could know was that Dr. Reynolds' recommendation had set in motion a series of events that would soon force their hand. The hospital ethics committee, reviewing Frank's case file, had already scheduled a meeting to discuss the appropriate course of action for a patient with minimal prospects of recovery and increasingly limited financial resources. And Thomas Wilson, watching the Miller home from the shadows, was formulating his own plans to acquire the property he coveted. Plans that would not be hindered by sentimentality or a family's desperate hope. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, the Memorial Hospital logo stark against the white envelope. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, scanning the formal language until she reached the paragraph that stopped her heart mid-beat. "The Ethics Committee has reviewed Frank Miller's case and recommends transitioning to comfort care measures. Given the prolonged nature of Mr. Miller's condition and the minimal improvement observed over 24 months, continuing aggressive life support may not align with best practices for patient dignity." The letter blurred as tears filled her eyes. A consultation had been scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. to discuss end-of-life planning. 3 days. They were giving her 3 days to prepare for a conversation about letting Frank die. Wolf, who had been dozing beside Frank's bed, raised his head as if sensing her distress. His amber eyes followed Sarah as she sank into the bedside chair, the letter crumpling in her grip. "They want to give up," she whispered, reaching out to stroke Frank's hand. "They say it's about dignity, but it's really about money and bed space and statistics." Her voice broke. 24 months is just a number. It doesn't define you, Frank. It doesn't determine what's possible." Wolf rose and padded to her side, resting his graying muzzle on her knee. Sarah buried her fingers in his fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. "We won't let them, will we, boy?" she said softly. Wolf's ears pricked forward, his gaze so intense it almost seemed he was formulating a plan of his own. Sarah called Lisa immediately, her daughter's outrage matching her own. Michael proved harder to reach, finally returning her call late that evening. "I think we need to listen to the medical team, Mom," he said, his voice carefully measured. "They're not suggesting this lightly." "They don't know your father like we do," Sarah countered, pacing the kitchen while keeping an eye on Frank through the open doorway. "They haven't seen how Wolf responds to him. There's something there, Michael, I know it." "Mom." Michael's sigh carried across the miles. "I love Dad, you know I do. But Wolf is a dog. His behavior isn't medically significant." "You're not here," Sarah snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. I'm sorry, but you're not here every day. You don't see what I see." After a long pause, Michael said, "I booked a flight. I'll be there Thursday night. We'll face this together, okay?" Sarah felt a momentary relief, followed quickly by dread. Was Michael coming to support her fight or to convince her to surrender? The following morning brought another unwelcome visitor. Thomas Wilson's sleek black car pulled into their driveway at precisely 10 o'clock. Sarah watched through the window as he straightened his tie before approaching the front door, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Wolf, noticing her attention, moved to her side, his body tense with alertness. "Mrs. Miller," Wilson greeted her with practiced sympathy when she opened the door. "I heard about the hospital's recommendation. This must be an incredibly difficult time for you." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "How exactly did you hear about a private medical matter, Mr. Wilson?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Our community is small. News travels." He held up the portfolio. "I've taken the liberty of preparing some papers that might help ease your burden during this transition. A purchase agreement for your property at a very generous price considering the circumstances, enough to cover any outstanding medical expenses and provide for your future needs." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll need to downsize now, I imagine." Sarah felt a surge of rage, so powerful it momentarily robbed her of speech. Beside her, Wolf's hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Get off my property," she finally managed, her voice deadly quiet. Wilson's expression hardened. "Mrs. Miller, I'm offering you a lifeline. The medical bills, the mortgage. They don't disappear with sentiment. Once life support is withdrawn—" "I said get out!" Sarah's voice rose sharply. Wolf moved forward, positioning himself between Sarah and Wilson, his growl intensifying. Wilson took a hasty step back, eyeing the shepherd warily. "Control your dog, Mrs. Miller. He is controlled. If he weren't, you'd know it." Sarah's hand rested on Wolf's head. "Now leave, before I forget my manners entirely." "You're making a mistake," Wilson said, retreating to his car. "My offer won't improve after Friday. Think about your future." After he left, Sarah sank to the floor, arms around Wolf's neck, allowing herself a moment of weakness before squaring her shoulders and returning to Frank's side. She needed a plan, some way to convince the hospital committee that Frank deserved more time. Thursday evening brought thunderstorms and Michael's arrival. Lisa picked him up from the airport while Sarah stayed with Frank, watching lightning split the darkening sky through the bedroom window. When her children entered, their strained expressions told her all she needed to know. They remained divided. The tension in the house was palpable as they shared a quiet dinner, conversation carefully avoiding tomorrow's hospital meeting. After dinner, Michael asked to sit with his father alone. Sarah agreed, retreating to the porch with Lisa and a pot of tea neither of them touched. Through the window, she could see her son sitting beside Frank's bed, talking quietly. Wolf remained at his post, watching Michael with what Sarah could only describe as cautious assessment. "He's going to side with the doctors," Lisa said softly, following her mother's gaze. "He's trying to be practical," Sarah replied, though the words tasted bitter. "He thinks he's protecting me." "From what?" "Hope." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "From heartbreak, I think, and financial ruin." She sighed heavily. "I can't say he's entirely wrong about the money. The insurance appeals were denied. The savings are nearly gone. We'll figure something out," Lisa insisted. "Crowdfunding, maybe. Or I could move back home, get a second job." Sarah shook her head. "I won't let you put your life on hold indefinitely." "It's not indefinite. Dad will wake up. I feel it." Inside, Michael had finished speaking to Frank and was now crouched beside Wolf, hesitantly extending his hand. To Sarah's surprise, Wolf allowed Michael to stroke his head, a tentative truce between unlikely allies. That night, none of them slept well. Sarah dozed fitfully in the chair beside Frank's bed, waking frequently to check the monitors and adjust his blankets. Wolf maintained his vigilant watch from the floor, occasionally lifting his head at sounds from outside, the distant rumble of thunder, the creak of branches in the wind, the whisper of rain against the windows. Friday dawned gray and somber, the storm having passed but leaving a heaviness in the air that matched their mood. Dr. Reynolds had arranged for a medical transport to bring Frank to the hospital for the ethics committee meeting. The ambulance was scheduled to arrive at noon, giving them time to prepare. "We should bring his dress shirt," Sarah said, moving mechanically through the morning routine. "The blue one that brings out his eyes, and his good slacks." Lisa nodded, helping her mother gather Frank's clothes while Michael stood awkwardly in the doorway, uncertain how to contribute. Wolf observed them all, his attention shifting between Frank and the increasing activity in the room. As Sarah laid out Frank's clothes on the bed, she noticed Wolf's behavior beginning to change. The shepherd's ears pricked forward, his body tensing slightly as he moved to the window, gazing out at the driveway as if expecting someone. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, following his gaze. Nothing seemed amiss outside, just the rain-slicked driveway and the gray November morning. Wolf turned back to Frank, then to the door, then back to Frank again. His movements became increasingly agitated as the morning progressed. By 11, he was pacing between the bedroom and the front door, occasionally emitting soft whines unlike his usual stoic demeanor. "He knows something's happening today," Lisa observed, watching Wolf make another circuit of the house. "He can sense we're upset." Michael, who had been skeptical of attributing human-like awareness to the dog, found himself unsettled by Wolf's obvious distress. "Maybe we should give him a mild sedative before the ambulance arrives. The vet left some for high-stress situations." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Wolf has been with Frank through everything. He deserves to be present and alert." As noon approached, Wolf's anxiety escalated dramatically. He stationed himself at Frank's bedside, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on his master's face. When the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the medical transport team, Wolf's head snapped toward the sound, a low growl building in his throat. "It's okay, boy," Sarah soothed, though her own heart was racing. "They're here to help Frank." The two paramedics entered efficiently, greeting the family and assessing Frank's condition and the equipment. They explained the transfer process, their voices gentle but professional. Throughout their explanation, Wolf remained unnaturally still, watching their every movement with intense focus. "That's quite a guardian you've got there," one paramedic commented, nodding toward Wolf. "German shepherds are incredibly loyal. He and Frank were partners in the police force," Sarah explained, her throat tight. "They've been inseparable for years. When the paramedics began disconnecting Frank from the home equipment in preparation for transfer to their portable units, Wolf's demeanor shifted dramatically. He moved forward, placing himself between the men and Frank, his growl deepening. "Wolf, stand down," Michael commanded, reaching for the dog's collar. Wolf sidestepped him with surprising agility for his age, continuing to block access to Frank. "Mom, you need to control him," Michael urged. "They can't do their job." Sarah knelt beside Wolf, looking directly into his amber eyes. "I know you're worried," she said softly. "We all are. But we need to let them help Frank." Wolf held her gaze for a long moment before reluctantly stepping aside, though his body remained tense, ready to intervene at the slightest provocation. The paramedics worked quickly, transferring Frank to their gurney and reconnecting him to portable life support. As they secured the straps across his body, Wolf began to pace again, his agitation visibly increasing. When they wheeled Frank toward the door, Wolf darted ahead, positioning himself in the doorway, effectively blocking their exit. "Wolf, move," Michael ordered sharply. The shepherd didn't budge. Lisa approached slowly. He doesn't want Dad to leave," she said, her voice cracking. "He knows what this meeting is about." One paramedic checked his watch nervously. "Mrs. Miller, I don't mean to rush you, but we need to get moving to make the appointment time." Sarah moved to Wolf, kneeling to embrace him. "We have to go, boy. We have to fight for Frank, and we can't do it from here." She stroked his fur, feeling the tension in his powerful frame. "You can come with us. You can stay with him, I promise." After a moment that seemed suspended in time, Wolf slowly, reluctantly stepped aside. The paramedics quickly maneuvered the gurney through the door and down the ramp Michael had installed months earlier. Wolf followed so closely that his nose nearly touched the gurney's edge. The journey to the hospital passed in tense silence. Sarah rode in the ambulance with Frank, while Lisa and Michael followed in separate cars. Wolf had been permitted to ride in the ambulance after Sarah insisted, his behavior impeccable despite his obvious distress, lying at the foot of the gurney, eyes never leaving Frank's face. As they pulled into the hospital ambulance bay, Sarah felt a sense of finality wash over her. This could be Frank's last journey, his final trip outside the home they had shared for 30 years. The thought was unbearable. The paramedics unloaded Frank with practiced efficiency, wheeling him through the emergency entrance toward the elevators. Wolf stayed close, his nails clicking softly on the polished floor. Hospital staff, many of whom recognized Sarah and Wolf from previous visits, watched with somber expressions as they passed. Dr. Reynolds met them on the 3rd floor, his face professionally neutral. "Mrs. Miller, we have Frank scheduled in room 312. The committee will join us at 2. He glanced at his watch. "That gives us about 40 minutes to get him settled and for you to compose your thoughts." Sarah nodded numbly, following as Frank was wheeled into the designated room. Wolf padded alongside, his attention divided between Frank and the unfamiliar surroundings. The room was larger than standard, with a conference table positioned near the window, clearly set up for the committee meeting to come. The paramedics transferred Frank to the hospital bed, connecting him to the facility's monitoring systems. A nurse entered to check vitals and ensure all equipment was functioning properly. Throughout the process, Wolf maintained his position at the foot of the bed, watching every move with unwavering focus. Lisa and Michael arrived minutes later, their faces tight with tension. Dr. Reynolds suggested they use the time before the meeting to gather their thoughts and discuss their position as a family. "The committee will want to hear from all of you," he explained. "Your perspectives matter in this decision." As the Miller family settled around the conference table, Wolf suddenly became more alert. His ears swiveled toward the door seconds before it opened, revealing a hospital orderly with a clipboard. "Dr. Reynolds, the ethics committee members are gathering in the conference room. They'd like a word before meeting the family." Mills nodded. "I'll be right there." He turned to Sarah. "Take your time. We'll begin precisely at 2. After he left, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Michael paced by the window while Lisa sat beside her mother, holding her hand. Sarah's eyes remained fixed on Frank, memorizing every line of his face, the specific rhythm of his ventilator-assisted breathing. At 5 minutes to 2, Wolf's behavior changed dramatically. He rose from his position, moving to the door and back to Frank, his movements increasingly urgent. A low whine escaped him, a sound of distress that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. "What's wrong with him?" Michael asked, pausing his pacing. Before Sarah could answer, the door opened again. Dr. Reynolds entered, followed by several people in professional attire, the ethics committee members. Their expressions were grave, their postures formal. Wolf's reaction was immediate and startling. As the group approached Frank's bed, the shepherd positioned himself between them and his master, his body rigid, a warning growl rumbling from deep in his chest. "Mrs. Miller," Dr. Reynolds said carefully, "you need to control your dog." Sarah moved to Wolf's side, placing a hand on his back. She could feel the tension vibrating through him, a coiled spring ready to release. "Wolf, it's okay," she murmured, though she felt anything but okay herself. A woman stepped forward, introducing herself as Dr. Eleanor Simmons, head of the Ethics Committee. "Mrs. Miller, I understand this is incredibly difficult, but we need to have a frank discussion about your husband's prognosis and care options." As she spoke, a male committee member moved closer to Frank's bed, reaching for the chart hanging at its foot. Wolf's growl deepened, his teeth now visible in clear warning. "Perhaps the dog should wait outside," the man suggested, eyeing Wolf nervously. "No," Sarah said firmly. "Wolf stays with Frank, always." Dr. Simmons glanced at Dr. Reynolds, who nodded reluctantly. Very well, let's begin the discussion while Dr. Carroll examines Mr. Miller's current readings. The committee members took seats at the table, motioning for the Miller family to join them. Sarah hesitated, torn between sitting at the conference table and remaining at Frank's side. Wolf made the decision for her, refusing to move from his protective position. As Dr. Carroll began examining the ventilator settings and IV medications, Wolf's agitation visibly increased. His eyes darted between the doctor and the conference table where the discussion was beginning, a discussion that would determine Frank's fate. No one was prepared for what happened next. Dr. Carroll moved methodically around Frank's bed, checking monitors and making notes on his tablet. Based on the latest neurological assessment, he began, addressing the committee rather than the family, patient continues to show minimal brain activity consistent with persistent vegetative state. Reflexes remain non-responsive to stimuli, and there have been no documented periods of wakeful consciousness since the injury. Dr. Simmons nodded gravely. Mrs. Miller, I understand your hope. It's natural and commendable, but medicine must be guided by evidence and patterns of outcome. After 24 months without significant improvement, we must consider whether continued aggressive intervention serves your husband's best interests. Sarah felt each word like a physical blow. Beside her, Wolf's growl had subsided to a continuous low rumble, a warning that hovered just below the threshold of open hostility. My husband is a fighter, Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. He survived situations in his police work that should have killed him. He doesn't give up. And neither do we. Michael cleared his throat. If I may, he leaned forward, hands clasped tightly on the table. I love my father deeply, but I'm concerned about the toll this is taking on my mother. The financial burden alone— Don't, Lisa interrupted sharply. Don't you dare make this about money. It's not just about money, Michael countered. It's about facing reality. Dad has been unresponsive for 2 years. 2 years, Lisa. While the siblings argued, Dr. Carroll had moved to the head of Frank's bed, methodically examining the ventilator connections. I'm going to check his response to respiratory stimuli, he announced clinically. Standard protocol for these evaluations. What happened next occurred with such speed that those watching would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. Dr. Carroll reached for the ventilator tube where it entered Frank's throat. His intention was to momentarily adjust its position, a routine procedure to check for a gag reflex, a neurological response that might indicate higher brain function. Wolf, however, interpreted the motion differently. In his vigilant mind, honed by years of police work, the doctor wasn't examining Frank, he was threatening him. The shepherd launched himself forward with explosive force, his aged body suddenly channeling the power of his prime years. His teeth closed around Dr. Carroll's arm, not breaking skin through the lab coat, but delivering an unmistakable warning. "Wolf, no!" Sarah cried, lunging forward to pull the dog back. The room erupted in chaos. Dr. Carroll stumbled backward, knocking over an IV stand. A nurse hit the emergency call button. 2 security guards who had been stationed outside rushed in, hands moving to their belts. "Don't hurt him," Lisa shouted, throwing herself between the guards and Wolf. "He's protecting his partner." Wolf had released Dr. Carroll's arm and returned to Frank's side, standing over him like a sentinel, teeth bared, hackles raised, the very picture of a police K-9 defending a fallen officer. "That animal is dangerous," Dr. Simmons declared, her professional composure cracking. "It needs to be removed immediately." "He thought you were hurting, Frank," Sarah explained desperately, her hand on Wolf's back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his breathing. "He was a police dog. He's trained to protect." Dr. Reynolds, who had witnessed countless life-and-death situations, recognized the potential for disaster. "Everyone needs to step back," he ordered calmly. "Mrs. Miller, please secure your dog. Security will wait outside. No one is taking any action until we defuse this situation." The room gradually quieted, though tension remained thick in the air. Wolf's growl subsided, but his vigilant stance did not relax. Dr. Carroll, nursing his bruised arm, retreated to the far side of the room. "I apologize for Wolf's reaction," Sarah said quietly, But you need to understand, he's been by Frank's side for 2 years. He knows every person who touches him, every procedure, every routine. He's never reacted this way before." Dr. Simmons adjusted her glasses, visibly struggling to regain her professional detachment. "While I appreciate the bond between your husband and his dog, Mrs. Miller, this incident only underscores our concerns. Home care for a patient in your husband's condition requires controlled conditions. If care providers cannot safely perform their duties—" "Are you suggesting," Lisa interrupted incredulously, "that Wolf's protective behavior is a reason to withdraw care? When it's the most compelling evidence that someone in this room still believes Frank is in there." Michael, who had remained frozen during the confrontation, finally found his voice. "Wolf has been with Dad through everything," he said, surprising his mother and sister. "If he sensed a threat just now, maybe we should listen." Dr. Reynolds observed the family's unified front with a thoughtful expression. He'd been practicing medicine for over 3 decades, had seen technological miracles and inexplicable recoveries, had watched science advance and still failed to explain certain phenomena. The bond between this man and his dog existed outside his medical textbooks, yet he couldn't entirely dismiss it. "Perhaps," he suggested carefully, "we should postpone this meeting, give everyone time to regroup and approach this decision with clearer heads." Dr. Simmons objected. "Dr. Reynolds, hospital policy in cases of animal aggression is quite clear." "This isn't a typical case of animal aggression," Dr. Reynolds countered. "This is a trained police K-9 who perceived a threat to his handler. Context matters." The ethical debate amplified, with committee members divided between strict protocol adherence and consideration of the unique circumstances. Throughout the increasingly heated discussion, no one noticed the subtle change on the monitor beside Frank's bed. A slight but distinct alteration in the pattern of brain waves that had remained essentially unchanged for 2 years. No one except Wolf. The shepherd's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. His aggressive stance gradually softened, his attention turning fully to Frank's face rather than the threats around him. A soft whine escaped him, not of distress, but of recognition. Sarah, attuned to every nuance of Wolf's behavior after their shared vigil, noticed the change immediately. "Wolf?" she whispered, following his gaze to Frank's face. For a moment, nothing happened. The argument continued around them, medical ethics clashing with family devotion. Then Wolf placed his front paws on the edge of the bed, something he had never done before, and leaned forward to gently press his muzzle against Frank's hand, and Frank's fingers twitched. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, the slightest curl of his index finger against Wolf's fur. But to Sarah, who had watched those hands remain motionless for 2 years, it might as well have been a thunderclap. "Frank?" Her voice broke on his name. "Frank, can you hear me?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the bed. Wolf whined again, nudging Frank's hand with his nose, and again those fingers moved. Not a reflex, but a response. Dr. Reynolds moved quickly to Frank's side, professional skepticism warring with the evidence before his eyes. "Mr. Miller, can you hear us?" The monitors began registering changes, subtle at first, then increasingly significant. Heart rate elevated slightly, respiratory effort against the ventilator, and on the neural activity display, patterns shifting from the flat, minimal readings of persistent vegetation to something more organized, more purposeful. "This is unexpected," Dr. Carroll murmured, medical curiosity temporarily overriding his fear of Wolf. As they watched in stunned silence, Frank's eyelids fluttered, once, twice, then opening to reveal disoriented blue eyes that hadn't seen the world in 2 years. His gaze wandered unfocused for a moment before settling on Wolf, whose tail had begun a cautious, hopeful wag. Frank's lips moved around the ventilator tube, attempting to form words that couldn't come. His hand lifted a fraction of an inch, reaching for the dog who had never left his side. "Oh my God," Lisa breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Dad?" It was the miracle they had prayed for. arriving at the very moment they were being asked to stop believing in miracles. Yet even in this transcendent moment of hope, none of them could see the price that had been paid. That Wolf, in his desperate defense of his master, had pushed his aged heart beyond its limits. The adrenaline that had given him the strength to protect Frank one final time was now exacting its toll, unnoticed amidst the wonder of Frank's awakening. The days following Frank's miraculous awakening unfolded in a blur of medical tests, cautious optimism, and gradual revelations. The ventilator was removed within 48 hours, replaced by supplemental oxygen as Frank's breathing stabilized. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a raspy whisper, unfamiliar even to himself after 2 years of silence. "Sarah," he'd murmured on that first night, his wife's name the first word to pass his lips. She'd been dozing in the chair beside his bed, Wolf curled at her feet. Both had startled awake at the sound, Sarah's eyes filling with tears, Wolf's tail thumping weakly against the floor. Dr. Reynolds had cautioned the family against expecting too much too quickly. "Recovery from prolonged coma is a marathon, not a sprint," he explained during a family conference the morning after Frank's awakening. "There will be significant physical challenges, muscle atrophy, coordination issues, possible cognitive deficits. We need to approach this methodically." But Frank Miller had spent his life defying expectations. The man who had once pursued armed suspects without hesitation now channeled that same determination into the simplest tasks, holding a spoon, turning his head, forming complete sentences. Each small victory was celebrated by the family that had refused to give up on him. Wolf remained a constant presence, though the hospital administration had reluctantly revised their rules to allow him extended visiting hours rather than permanent residence. The shepherd's own health had become a quiet concern for Sarah. Since the confrontation in Frank's hospital room, Wolf had seemed somehow diminished. Still devotedly attentive, but moving more slowly, eating less, sleeping more deeply when he finally allowed himself rest. "He gave everything he had to bring Frank back," Lisa whispered to her mother one afternoon as they watched Wolf dozing beside the hospital bed, his muzzle resting on the mattress near Frank's hand. "It's like he used up his reserves." Sarah had arranged for the veterinarian to examine Wolf in Frank's hospital room, not wanting to separate them even briefly. Dr. Morales had been gentle but frank in her assessment. "His heart is showing signs of strain," she'd explained quietly to Sarah in the hallway afterward. "Not unusual for a shepherd his age, especially one who's been under prolonged stress. I can prescribe medication to help, but—" She'd hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "He's given extraordinary service, Sarah. Sometimes when these working dogs complete what they see as their mission, they don't," Sarah had interrupted, unable to bear the completion of that thought. "He needs to be here for Frank's recovery. They need each other." On the 5th day after Frank's awakening, Dr. Richardson, the neurologist who had replaced Dr. Reynolds as Frank's primary physician, conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment. The results surpassed even the most optimistic predictions. Frank's long-term memory remained largely intact. He recognized family members, recalled his police career, and even remembered the day of his accident with remarkable clarity. "The roof," he'd said to Sarah, his voice growing stronger with each passing day. "Wolf tried to warn me. He knew something was wrong." Sarah had nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "He did everything short of speaking English to keep you off that ladder." Frank's hand, still weak but increasingly responsive, reached out to stroke Wolf's head. The shepherd had lifted his muzzle to meet the touch, amber eyes fixed on Frank's face with unwavering devotion. "Smart boy," Frank murmured. "Smartest partner I ever had." What stunned the medical team more than Frank's physical recovery was what he revealed about his experience during the coma. During a session with Dr. Richardson, with Sarah and Lisa present at his request, Frank described what he had perceived during those 2 years of apparent unconsciousness. "I wasn't gone," he explained haltingly, searching for words to describe the indescribable. "It was like being underwater, everything muffled, distant. I couldn't respond, couldn't move, but I could sense things, people, especially Wolf. Dr. Richardson leaned forward, professional curiosity piqued. You were aware of your dog's presence specifically? Frank nodded slowly. He was the clearest thing. When he lay beside the bed, I could feel the warmth. When he whined, it cut through everything else. He was... Frank paused, emotion tightening his throat. He was my anchor, my way back. The neurologist made careful notes. This type of awareness during what presents clinically as a vegetative state is rare, but not unprecedented. It's one reason we always counsel families to speak to unresponsive patients as if they can hear. He heard everything, Sarah confirmed, thinking of the countless hours she'd spent reading to Frank, telling him about her day, describing Wolf's unwavering vigil. Frank's gaze drifted to the window, his expression distant. I remember Thomas Wilson coming to the house, he said unexpectedly. His voice, there was something about it that cut through the fog. Something that made me uneasy, even then. Sarah and Lisa exchanged surprised glances. You could hear him? Lisa asked. Not words, exactly, but his presence. It felt wrong, threatening. Frank turned to Sarah. He wanted the house, didn't he? I could feel your distress whenever he was there. He's been trying to buy the property for his development project, Sarah confirmed. Huh? Became more aggressive about it as time went on. Frank's jaw tightened, a glimpse of the determined police officer he had once been. There's something not right about him. Something familiar in a bad way. The conversation might have ended there, a recovering patient's vague impressions, nothing more, if Michael hadn't arrived at that moment, carrying a folder of paperwork and a cardboard tube containing what appeared to be blueprint plans. I think Dad might be onto something about Wilson, he announced without preamble. I've been doing some digging. For the first time since Frank's accident, Michael had fully engaged his legal training and corporate resources. The eldest Miller child spread documents across Frank's adjustable bed table. Property records, business filings, newspaper clippings dating back several years. Wilson's development company has a pattern, Michael explained, pointing to various highlighted sections. They target properties in established neighborhoods, particularly those with owners facing financial hardship, medical bills, foreclosure, death in the family. They make lowball offers presented as acts of compassion. Predatory, Lisa murmured, scanning the documents. It gets worse, Michael continued. 3 of his past projects involved properties where the owners suffered accidents shortly before Wilson acquired the land. Nothing that could be tied to him directly. A gas leak in one case, a fall down basement stairs in another, a car brake failure in the third. Frank's eyes narrowed, police instincts reawakening. The latter. He said softly, What? Sarah looked up sharply. The day I fell. The ladder felt wrong. It shifted too easily, like... Frank struggled to access the memory. Like the locking mechanism had been tampered with. A heavy silence fell over the room. Wolf, who had been dozing beside the bed, raised his head suddenly, ears pricked forward as if sensing the shift in energy. You think Wilson sabotaged the ladder? Lisa's voice was incredulous. That's attempted murder. It would be nearly impossible to prove after all this time, Michael said, the lawyer in him automatically assessing the evidentiary challenges. Frank shook his head slowly. The ladder's probably long gone. But Wilson doesn't know I remember anything, doesn't know I was aware during those visits to the house. His gaze met Sarah's, a spark of the detective he'd once been lighting his eyes. And he certainly doesn't know I'm awake now. Dr. Richardson, who had remained silent during this family revelation, cleared her throat. Mr. Miller, while I understand your suspicions, I'd caution against anything that might impede your recovery. Your primary focus needs to be rehabilitation. Frank nodded, but Sarah recognized the look on her husband's face, the same expression he'd worn when pursuing a difficult case during his police days. His mind was already formulating a plan. That evening, after the doctors had completed their rounds and the hospital had quieted for the night, Frank asked Sarah to help him sit fully upright in bed, a position he found uncomfortable but necessary for the conversation he wanted to have. "We need to set a trap," he said without preamble when Michael and Lisa joined them. "Wilson doesn't know I'm conscious. That's our advantage." "Frank, you've been awake less than a week," Sarah protested. "You need to focus on getting stronger." "I need to protect my family," Frank countered. "Wilson was willing to kill me to get our property. What happens when he learns I've recovered? That his plan failed? He might try again. Or worse, he might target you." Wolf, who had been unusually lethargic throughout the day, rose slowly from his position on the floor and moved to press against Frank's bed, as if signaling his agreement. Frank reached down to stroke the shepherd's head, noticing with concern how Wolf leaned heavily into the touch. "You okay, boy?" he murmured. Wolf looked up at him with loyal eyes that seemed somehow apologetic, then settled back down with a sigh. Frank returned his attention to his family. "Here's what we do. We keep my awakening quiet. No social media, no announcements beyond immediate family. Let Wilson believe nothing has changed." "And then?" Lisa asked. "Then we feed him exactly what he wants to hear. That the hospital ethics committee recommended withdrawing care, and that Sarah is finally considering his offer on the house." Frank's strategy, honed by years of undercover operations, unfolded methodically. "Michael, you have friends in the county prosecutor's office, right?" Michael nodded. "Senior Assistant DA Jason Mercer was my roommate in law school." "Good. We'll need him." Frank's voice grew stronger as the plan took shape. "When Wilson comes to close the deal, thinking Sarah's vulnerable and I'm still unconscious, we'll have recording devices ready. If he's responsible for my accident, his overconfidence might lead him to reveal it." "It's risky," Sarah said, her brow furrowed with worry. "What if he suspects something?" "He won't," Frank assured her. "Men like Wilson are predators. They see what they expect to see: a grieving wife, a fractured family, an easy target. His arrogance will be his downfall." As the Millers refined their strategy into the night, none of them noticed Wolf's increasingly labored breathing, the subtle tremor in his aging limbs, or the way his once liberal eyes occasionally lost focus before determinedly sharpening again. The shepherd who had guarded Frank through 2 years of darkness was still standing watch, still protecting, even as his own strength began to fail. The truth about Thomas Wilson would soon be revealed, but another truth, equally significant and infinitely more painful, remained hidden in plain sight. Wolf had completed his mission at a cost none of them had yet recognized. 3 weeks after Frank's awakening, Thomas Wilson arrived at Memorial Hospital carrying a bouquet of sympathy lilies and a leather portfolio containing property transfer documents. His carefully cultivated expression of somber compassion slipped momentarily when he spotted Michael in the hallway outside Frank's room. "Mr. Miller," Wilson greeted him with forced cordiality. "I didn't expect to see you here. I understood from your mother that today was a difficult day for your family." Michael nodded grimly. "Mom asked me to handle the paperwork. She couldn't face it alone." He gestured toward the closed door. "She's saying her goodbyes." Wilson's eyes gleamed with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Of course. A private moment. Perhaps I should wait—" "No," Michael interrupted. "She's expecting you. The doctors have already discontinued life support. It's just a matter of time now." His voice cracked convincingly. "She wants to settle everything today. A fresh start, she says." Inside the room, Frank lay motionless on the hospital bed, eyes closed, breathing appearing shallow and labored. The ventilator had been removed as part of their ruse, replaced with a nasal cannula. Sarah sat beside him, her face tear-streaked, one hand clasping Frank's. Wolf lay at the foot of the bed, his aging body curled protectively near Frank's feet. The shepherd's condition had deteriorated noticeably in recent days, though the family had been too focused on their plan to fully acknowledge it. His once vibrant amber eyes followed Wilson as he entered, but the dog made no move to rise. conserving his dwindling energy for what mattered most. "Mrs. Miller," Wilson said softly, approaching with practiced sympathy. "Words cannot express how sorry I am that it's come to this." Sarah looked up, her grief only partially manufactured. The strain of the past 3 weeks, Frank's recovery challenges, Wolf's declining health, the dangerous game they were now playing, had taken its toll. "Mr. Wilson," she acknowledged tiredly, "Michael said you brought the papers." "Yes, but please, there's no rush." Wilson set his portfolio on the bedside table. "This is a difficult moment. Take all the time you need." Lisa, positioned unobtrusively in the corner of the room, watched Wilson with barely concealed contempt. The small recording device in her pocket was capturing every word, while additional microphones hidden throughout the room ensured nothing would be missed. Outside in the hall, Assistant District Attorney Jason Mercer waited with 2 officers, listening through an earpiece. "The doctor said it wouldn't be long," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Once they remove the ventilator, his breathing is already changing." Wilson nodded solemnly. "A peaceful end, at least, after such a tragic accident." "Was it?" Sarah looked up sharply. "An accident?" Wilson blinked, momentarily thrown by her tone. Of course. What else could it have been?" Frank's fingers twitched slightly against the bed sheet, an involuntary movement that caught Wilson's eye. The developer frowned, leaning closer to study Frank's face. "The ladder," Sarah continued, pressing forward with their plan. "Frank was always so careful with equipment. It seemed strange that it would suddenly fail." "Equipment ages," Wilson replied smoothly, regaining his composure. "Accidents happen to the most careful people." His attention returned to the documents in his portfolio. "Now, about the property transfer. I've prepared a very generous offer, considering the circumstances. The circumstances being my husband's convenient fall that left our property vulnerable." Sarah's grief gave way to cold anger. "The circumstances being your repeated attempts to pressure me while Frank was helpless." Wilson's expression hardened. "Mrs. Miller, I understand you're emotional, but I've only tried to help to offer solutions." "Solutions to a problem you created," Frank said, his eyes opening, voice clear and steady. Wilson stumbled backward, knocking over the vase of lilies. Water spilled across the floor as he stared in disbelief at the man he had believed was dying. That's impossible," he stammered. "You were comatose," Frank finished for him, slowly sitting up. "I was, for 2 years. Plenty of time to hear things, like your visits to my home, your pressure on my wife, your convenient appearances after my accident." The hospital room door opened as Assistant D.A. Mercer entered, followed by the 2 officers. "Thomas Wilson," Mercer announced formally, "we'd like to ask you some questions regarding the incident involving Frank Miller on November 17, 2021. Wilson's face drained of color. "This is absurd. I had nothing to do with any accident." "Funny," Frank said, his police officer's instincts fully reawakened. "I don't recall anyone mentioning sabotage. Just an accident." Wolf, summoning unexpected strength, rose to his feet at the foot of the bed, amber eyes fixed on Wilson with the intensity that had once made him one of the department's most effective K-9 officers. Though aged and weakened, in that moment the shepherd radiated the power that had protected his partner through countless dangerous situations. "You should know," Michael added, stepping further into the room, "that we found the ladder, stored in our garage all this time. The locking mechanism shows clear signs of tampering, filing marks on the metal pins, traces of a lubricant that would cause it to slip under pressure. This was a calculated bluff. The ladder had been discarded long ago, but Wilson had no way of knowing that." The developer's eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape. "Don't," Liesel warned, recognizing his intention. "Wolf may be old, but he can still take down a suspect. It's what he was trained for." As if understanding her words, Wolf moved to position himself between Wilson and the exit, his stance unmistakably that of a police K-9 preventing flight. Wilson's composure crumbled entirely. "You can't prove anything," he hissed. but his panicked expression told a different story. "We have your voice on multiple recordings discussing the property," Mercer informed him, "and witnesses from your previous development projects have suddenly become very talkative when presented with the pattern of accidents preceding your acquisitions." The officers moved forward, handcuffing a shell-shocked Wilson and reciting his rights. As they led him from the room, the developer looked back once at the family he had nearly destroyed and at the shepherd who had ultimately foiled his plan. In the quiet aftermath of Wilson's arrest, the Millers gathered around Frank's bed, the relief of justice tempered by the gravity of what they had endured and what still lay ahead. Frank's recovery had only just begun, the road to full rehabilitation stretching long before him. "We did it," Lisa said, squeezing her father's hand. "He'll pay for what he did to you?" Frank nodded, but his attention had shifted to Wolf, who had returned to his place beside the bed, lying down heavily, his breathing more labored than before. Frank reached down to stroke the shepherd's head, feeling the slight tremor in the aging body. "Good boy," he whispered. "The best partner anyone could ask for." Wolf's tail thumped weakly against the floor, amber eyes meeting Frank's with the same devotion that had sustained them both through 2 years of darkness. The following weeks brought both healing and heartache to the Miller family. Frank progressed through physical therapy with the same determination that had defined his police career, graduating from bed to wheelchair to walker, each step forward celebrated as a victory over what might have been. Thomas Wilson faced multiple charges, including attempted murder and fraud, as investigations uncovered a pattern of criminal behavior spanning years. His development company collapsed as former associates rushed to distance themselves, offering testimony in exchange for immunity. But as Frank grew stronger, Wolf continued to decline. The veterinarian confirmed what the family had feared, but refused to acknowledge. The shepherd's heart was failing, weakened by age and the extraordinary stress of his 2-year vigil. "He held on until you came back," Dr. Morales explained gently to Frank during a home visit. "Some animals just know when their job is done." On a crisp autumn morning, 6 weeks after Frank's awakening, the Miller family gathered in their backyard beneath a maple tree that had finally turned the vibrant red Frank had always admired. Frank, now able to walk short distances with a cane, sat in a garden chair with Wolf lying beside him on a soft blanket, the shepherd's head resting on his lap. "I never told you about the dreams I had while I was under," Frank said softly, stroking Wolf's graying muzzle. "I was lost in this dark place, couldn't find my way out, but there was always this presence guiding me, a warm weight beside me, a voice without words telling me to hold on." His voice broke. "It was you, boy. Always you." Wolf's eyes, cloudy now with age but still filled with devotion, remained fixed on Frank's face. His tail moved in a slow, gentle wag. Sarah, sitting nearby with Lisa and Michael, wiped tears from her cheeks. "He never left your side. Not once in 2 years, and I won't lead his," Frank promised, continuing the rhythmic stroking that seemed to ease Wolf's labored breathing. As the afternoon sun filtered through the red maple leaves, casting warm patches of light across the blanket, Wolf slipped peacefully away, his final mission complete, his loyalty unwavering to the end. Frank held him close, whispering thanks for the extraordinary gift of devotion that had defied medical science and rewritten the ending of their story. In the spring, when Frank had regained enough strength to walk unaided, the family installed a simple stone bench beneath the maple tree, engraved with words that told only a fraction of an extraordinary tale. Wolf, partner, guardian, friend, who taught us that love needs no words. And on quiet evenings, Frank could often be found sitting there, sometimes talking aloud as if Wolf could still hear him, sometimes silent in remembrance. The neighbors grew accustomed to the sight, the tall man with silver hair, now walking without assistance, pausing each night to rest his hand on that stone bench before continuing on his way, honoring the companion who had refused to let him go, even when all hope seemed lost. In life's autumn years, when doubts shadow our path, and medical charts seem to dictate our worth, remember Frank and Wolf's story. Like you, they faced a world quick to give up, where efficiency trumps patience and statistics overrule hope. But sometimes the deepest wisdom comes not from medical textbooks, but from a silent companion who refuses to leave when others have gone. Wolf knew what the doctors couldn't measure, that presence matters, that love sustains, that some connections transcend explanation. His unwavering faith reminds us that our worth isn't defined by productivity or independence, but by the hearts we've touched and the loyalty we've inspired. As you navigate health challenges or face a society that often overlooks its elders, remember, your story isn't finished yet. The most powerful healing doesn't always come from medicine, but from the steadfast presence of those who believe in you when statistics suggest otherwise. Like Wolf, they see beyond your current limitations to the person you've always been, worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth every sacrifice. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.